Have we tested the Lili's presentation?
Yes, we did.
Everything's okay.
It's okay, good.
Okay, we are live.
Ok. We're on. Bem, bom dia a todos e todas que estão do lado de cá do Atlântico. Boa tarde para a nossa querida Lili, que está lá do outro lado do Atlântico, diretamente de Lisboa. Começamos aqui nossa reunião de hoje, sexta-feira, 16 de outubro, do nosso grupo ILF Brasil. So, good morning, the ones who don't understand Portuguese. Good morning, good afternoon. So, today we are going to have the pleasure to have with us a very special guest. Uma convidada muito especial, uma amiga querida, uma pesquisadora de ILF muito dedicada, Lili Cavalheiro, que vai falar conosco diretamente de Lisboa sobre o tema do texto que nós passamos para o grupo, né? Então, Lili, em primeiro lugar, muito obrigado por estar disponível para estar conosco. Eu sei das dificuldades que Lili é uma mãe recente e não é fácil estar com o bebezinho e trabalhando, então, principalmente nesses tempos pandêmicos. Então, obrigado por você dedicar essas 2 horas, se for o caso, para estar conosco. Eu vou começar, como tenho sempre começado, falando um pouco sobre o convidado e explicar que Lili will present in English and we can make questions after her presentation in English or in Portuguese. Both here in the Zoom room or on the YouTube channel. Então, Lili Cavalheiro has a PhD in Applied Linguistics from School of Arts and Humanities from the University of Lisbon, where she also teaches in the Masters in ELT and is a researcher at the University of Lisbon Center for English Studies. She has been involved in several European-funded projects, and most recently, she is lead Enrich partner in Portugal for the Erasmus Plus project Enrich English as a Lingua Franca for inclusive multilingual classrooms. We recently had a very nice conference, so one-day conference that they put together for the Enrich project. Her research interests include English as a lingua franca, English language teaching, teacher education, materials development, and intercultural communication. So she recently edited the volume Preparing English Teachers for Today's Globalized World, and I have here a copy of the book. And I had the pleasure of being one of the writers, the chapter writers. And if anybody's interested in the book, we can see how you can import this directly from Lisbon. So the presentation today is based on the chapter Lili wrote for our Estudos Linguísticos e Literários that we put together a special ELF issue last year. And she gave the title, Becoming Successful Intercultural Communicators Through English. So then she will present for about half an hour or so. And after the presentation, we are going to, we begin the questions, the Q&A session. Okay, so Lili, welcome. Thank you again for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Primeiro de tudo, Sávia, eu vou começar em português para saudar aí o público no Brasil. Obrigada, primeiro de tudo, pelo convite. É sempre um prazer estar convosco. É pena, normalmente nós encontramos-nos em Lisboa anualmente. Este ano, por causa da pandemia, não tivemos a oportunidade de nos ver fisicamente, mas é sempre bom estes encontros virtuais para matar um bocadinho as saudades. Turning now over to English. So thank you, Savi, for this invitation. I know that there have been several distinguished speakers in this group, in these sessions, so I'm hoping that my talk today will also be of interest to everyone. I'm probably going to now share my screen. Let me see here. Hold on, I'm just going to stop this because I may need something about here with optimizing the screen. Hold on, so that there aren't any issues. Hold on. Is it sharing?
Yes.
Can you see my screen? Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. So okay. So today, my talk is on becoming a successful intercultural communicators through English. And as Savi mentioned, this is based on an article that I published in the journal Linguísticos e Literários, which was a result of a conference that we went through to, and that was a colloquium that we organized. And I chose to talk about this here today because I think that it gives us a little bit of an understanding and some examples afterwards that I'll give in terms of becoming successful intercultural communicators. Let me just, here. To give you an idea of the outline, so I'll start with a brief introduction. Then we'll take a look at some of key references, words such as English as a lingua franca, intercultural communicative competence, intercultural awareness, and intercultural communication. Afterwards, I'll take a look at the issue that we need to rethink the EFL classroom if we want to build and help develop more successful English learners who will be able to use English outside of the classroom and become ELF users. Then I'll show you a case study from Portugal, and then I'll finish with some final remarks. So, in terms of a brief introduction, as we know today, well, if we're going to think about it, the pandemic has changed a little bit of our reality, but nonetheless, if we're going to describe our society, globalization has truly characterized our recent decades and more recently through the social media, through transportation, tourism. We've been become a truly globalized world. Also, if we take a look at the issue of migration and refugees, and this specifically is visible in certain areas of our globe. Here in Europe, you've probably seen from the news, this is and has been in recent years an issue dealing with migrants and refugees seeking better and safer living conditions, sorry. And obviously these bring about changes at many levels in countries. We're talking about not only at a linguistic level, but also at a cultural and societal level. So if we're going to be talking about this issue of globalization and of migration, one of the issues that if we want to build successful mobility, integration, and interaction, effective communication is key. And many of the times, as we know, English is usually the common medium of choice. It is, as we know, the most used language, and therefore functions as a lingua franca in many of these situations. And if we take into consideration this use of English, obviously EFL classrooms are and need to be taken into consideration. They can be used to facilitate the integration of migrant students by promoting dialogue and intercultural exchanges on the one hand, but it also can be used, these classrooms, as a springboard to broaden learners' intercultural awareness of how English is used by multiple speakers in diverse settings, and essentially preparing them for real-world interactions, right? If we learn a language, it's not supposed to be confined into the classroom, but actually being able to use it. So the issue here is trying to get EFL teachers to create more inclusive, comprehensive lessons in their classrooms, so to help break down some barriers and taboos that exist regarding both language and culture. So beginning at some of the key concepts before we take a look at examples and the issue of teaching. I chose here today Anna Moranen's definition of English as a lingua franca. As you know, many definitions have been put forth regarding ELF. However, I chose this one in specific because it's one of the most recent and it has certain particularities that others haven't mentioned directly. So according to Moranen, ELF as the English that is spoken in situations with widely varying combinations of participants, including first language speakers of different varieties. So as we know, some of the first definitions of ELF didn't include L1 speakers. More recent ones have included them already. But here we have, right, varying combinations as participants. We never know if we're going to be speaking with a Portuguese from Brazil and Portugal, with someone in a French person, a Chinese person, a Russian person, right? The combinations are endless. ELF is not just also a contact language, where English is a domestic language or otherwise especially salient in a given community, but a non-local lingua franca, the means of communicating between people from anywhere around the world. And this is a key aspect, right? Anywhere around the world. Today here, I'm sure that we have people from many different places attending this session. Neither is its global weight restricted to elite usages in politics, international business, or academia, but is also employed by tourists, migrant workers, asylum seekers, and just anyone in their daily lives over digital media. There is not even a need to move around physically to be in contact with English. So obviously we're not here talking about just English used by an elite in formal settings like academia or politics, let's say, but the fact that English is in fact being used outside our doors when we go and travel from one place to another by workers that come in from other countries to find better living conditions in our countries, and they don't know our local languages. And the aspect that I think here is very interesting that Moran mentions as well is the issue of digital media. And more, especially with the pandemic, that we're stuck at home and having Zoom meetings and so on, the contact with English is increasingly also digital, virtual, right? So if we take this in mind, Baker mentions that ELF is by definition intercultural in nature, since ELF communication is typically defined as involving speakers from different lingua cultures. So if we take this into consideration, ELF exchanges, in fact, reflect participants' multilingual and multicultural backgrounds. ELF exchanges recognize the participants' linguistic and cultural difference. And ELF exchanges acknowledge the importance of interaction and negotiation for successful intercultural communication. These are all issues that play an important part when we are talking about ELF. And it's traditionally, we would think of English as being associated with one standard, one culture. Considering the use that nowadays is associated with it, we go beyond those aspects. So if we're going to focus on actually achieving effective communication, what does it include? It means going beyond native-like competence in lexis, phonology, or syntax. And this is an issue that many times it's difficult for learners to understand this. And especially when we're talking about at schools and parents are involved as well, they like to have grammar exercises, right? And it's sometimes difficult for the teacher to try to explain what is being done and the aim of what is being done in the classroom if they try to take on a different type of an approach. So if we're talking about effective communication, it includes also a variety of communicative and pragmatic strategies. And some of them that here, these are very few, obviously, from Jenkins et al. From 2011, accommodation, being able to code switch and translanguaging as well, being explicit, preempting misunderstanding, repetition, paraphrasing. We could go on with different types of strategies that are used in order to get a message successfully through. These issues, though, sometimes, what happens? They're sometimes associated with poor linguistic proficiency, but they're in fact examples of pragmatic competence when employed by intercultural speakers who are able to adapt their speech according to the communicative situation in question and its participants. And I think about when we think about this sometimes, when we're speaking our own mother tongue, we use these strategies because it's normal that you may be having a conversation with someone and not get your message clearly through, even if you're talking in your mother tongue. And we don't think about these strategies. However, when we're learning a foreign language, many of the times we're so stuck on the grammatical rules and being correct and trying to follow a certain order that we don't think about using these. So these are some issues to keep in mind, right? Moving ahead and thinking about here, if we're talking about successful communication, becoming an intercultural speaker, the issue of ICC, Byram's notion of ICC first put forth in 1997 has been fundamental when considering individuals' understanding of his or her own culture and that of others, as well as how communication is shaped by it. And according to him, by adopting a critical approach to culture and communication, it's necessary to have an open disposition to discover and acknowledge the differences that occur in communication and to mediate between different communicative practices and cultural groups. So these are aspects to obviously consider when we are talking about communication. It's not just being linguistically competent, but going beyond that. However, considering here Byram's notion of ICC, it's been criticized sometimes because it's centered nationally in terms of its outlook regarding culture. So if we take a look at Baker's intercultural awareness, which is a little bit more recent, there are some shared issues and features between intercultural awareness and ICC, such as the attitudes, knowledge, and skills necessary for intercultural communication. However, if we take a look at intercultural awareness, the primary focus doesn't fall on national perceptions of language and culture. Instead, it focuses on intercultural communication through ELF. So according to Baker, and this is the reality of the fact is, it's impossible to foresee all potential communicative scenarios that we'll encounter in English. So it's unlikely that we'll be able to ever come up with a detailed list of features that would be able to describe intercultural awareness. And this is what makes it sometimes confusing, right? And people feel a bit nervous. So what is this? Baker, therefore, talks about, we can only talk about only broad areas of awareness may be suggested. And according to him, and if we take a look here at this quote, these broad areas include different levels of awareness, moving from a general or basic awareness of a communication as a cultural practice to a more critical awareness of varied intercultural communicative practices, and finally, an advanced level of intercultural awareness, where flexibility, dynamism, and complexity are the norm. So these issues of this unpredictability, right, that we sometimes talk about here, it is the norm because we don't know what we'll encounter. Since most communicative situations are characterized, as I put here, international, diverse, and fluid in nature, communication, culture, and identity will inevitably be perceived as adaptable, constructed, and negotiable. And this is key when we're talking about learning a language. I recall a few years ago, I had a student from an Eastern European country, and she was talking about her experience as an English language learner. And she was saying, well, I would learn sentences and phrases from a book. And for instance, one of the things that she learned was, if she were to go to a train station, what would she say to the, if she wanted to buy a ticket, right? Or the train station or from the conductor. So when she traveled, when she went to England, she used the expression she had learned. I don't recall what exactly the sentence was, but the person on the other side responded something entirely different from what was in the textbook that she had learned from. So she was a bit lost. She was unable to deal with that situation because she had learned that if I say A, the person will respond B, then I will say C and the person will respond D. Obviously, language doesn't work that way, right? So this diversity, fluidity, adaptability, this notion of negotiation is key when we're talking about learning whatever language it may be. So how do we become successful intercultural communicators through English? Well, I would say that it's important to focus on these issues right from the start in the EFL classroom. And it doesn't have to be when they're already older. It can be right from when they're young learners, let's say at a primary school level. So we definitely need to think how English language teaching should go about. So when we think about the EFL classroom, usually it's associated with a specific linguistic standard and a set of cultural values, namely British and American. And I'm sure from your experience learning English, this was the case. Your textbooks probably had, if it's here in Europe, it's very British based traditionally. Now, more recently, we've had some American as well that is introduced. The images that are portrayed are also traditionally associated with a British culture, Big Ben and so on. I'm sure that the covers of your textbooks may have had Big Ben or the Statue of Liberty, right? However, when we think about it, it's increasingly difficult to establish a link between certain languages and cultures, particularly at a national level in intercultural communication. And this is especially the case when we think about communication in English. Individuals may not identify with or refer to a specific L1 culture. If we think about it, how English is being used internationally today, I may want to learn the language, but I don't even think about going to, let's say, Britain or the US. I may need it to work here in Portugal. And I don't even need to be in Lisbon, it can be in whatever town, because I receive tourists that don't necessarily have to be British or American. I may be receiving here a tourist coming from Russia, from China, and so on. So when we think about English today, we don't think about learning it to go to Britain, let's say. In the past, this was something that was very common here in Portugal a few decades ago. People would learn English to go to Britain and to take a trip to London, let's say. Not the case now, necessarily. Lourdes also mentions, Enrique Lourdes, in 2018, he refers to this quote, "Learning English no longer aims at communicating with a particular group of native people situated in a given local community," which was the example that I just gave you. It involves learning a language of communication in different communicative situations among very diverse and distant communities from anywhere in the world, and it is therefore an invaluable tool for intercultural communication. This is especially essential when we think that in EFL classrooms, students interact mostly with other non-native speakers, both inside and outside the classroom. And it's curious when we think about EFL, English as a foreign language, it's very different from other foreign languages in the sense that, at least here in Lisbon and here in Portugal in general, when you leave your house, not even, you can turn on the TV, you don't even need to leave your house, and you're already contacting with English. It's on the radio, it's on TV, commercials, advertisements on public transportation, names of stores, menus, and so on. So we're talking about not only a top-down process in terms of learning the language, but also bottom-up. Children usually bring, right from the start, their own experiences into the English classroom because they are already watching YouTube videos and playing games with other people from around the world, and they're using English to communicate with each other. So this aspect obviously makes English a little bit different from other foreign languages. Also, these issues are essential in multilingual and multicultural classrooms because English is usually the common denominator through which immigrant or migrant students are able to express themselves in contact with others. And many of our foreign students, if they're not from a Portuguese-speaking country, like Brazil, let's say, or from an African country like Angola or Mozambique, they don't know Portuguese many of the times when they get here. So English is usually the language that they've already learned in their home country. So that's the only common language that they have with their Portuguese classmates. And therefore, I think here the English classroom has a key role in helping them integrate better in our Portuguese society. So it's important, if we think about these issues, to rethink and reflect upon which English and which cultures should be taught in the EFL classroom. All right. When we take a look at the issue of teachers, pardon me, they may in fact recognize this diversity and fluidity associated with the use of English across different domains. They know that English is used at an educational level, that we use it for social purposes, that we use it for professional reasons, academic reasons, but there are several issues that remain. For instance, I put here some quotes from other colleagues that have already taken these issues into consideration. For instance, from Leung and Lukowitz, how do we deal with the multiple and always emergent and malleable language norms and practices? And how do teaching approaches and materials cope with this flux? This may be an issue that many teachers question themselves, right? It's very easy to like norms, right? Because if we like the notion of rules, if we know something works this way, that's the way that we explain it. But if there's change, how are we going to explain this to our students? And even our students like to have norms and rules so that they know what to follow. So if we don't give them these issues, sometimes they feel a bit, okay, so now what? How am I going to do this? The issue of materials is also an aspect that we're going to take a look at next. Savio here, I took this quote from 2016. He referred to the challenge for the practitioner is to find out how to really take culture as something intrinsic, inherent to the plural linguistic system he or she is teaching, and in a proactive way, make good use of it. And this is an issue as well, making good use of what you have, right? So what are we thinking about? ILF teachers or EFL teachers need what? They need to have a more flexible view of language in which competence is seen for a more pluralistic approach. Teachers need to take a careful look at the needs of their learner groups. And this here is crucial, I would say. Sometimes, and probably we've all experienced this, at a certain point, we may have planned a lesson for two different groups that are at the same English level. But with one group, our lesson plan worked very well, but with another group, it went horribly. And we don't understand why. So the issue is maybe if we had taken a look at how group A and group B, in which way do they differ? How can we adapt what works well with one group may not work well with another? And we need to consider the changes that need to be made. Also, teachers need to reflectively examine and reflect upon their classroom practices and educational values. And this is something that I think many of the times, once you become a teacher, you become so overwhelmed with the number of hours that you need for teaching, the number of hours you spend at meetings and so on, that there's usually no time to actually take a look and reflect upon what you are doing in the classroom with your students. And this is a key aspect that every once in a while, it is important to actually think, stop and take a look at what is being done. If we take a look at an EFL classroom today in 2020, it's obviously very different from what it was in 2010, in 1990, in 1970. There have been changes, right? And being a teacher doesn't mean what you've learned now will be the same in 30 years' time. There's this notion of being changes happening, and we need to be flexible and adapt our needs, our teaching practices according to the needs of our students. So here I would say what's crucial is professional training, both at a pre-service and in-service level. At a pre-service level, we're talking about teachers that probably don't have experience teaching, so we can right from the start help them in how these issues may be developed in the classroom, but especially also at an in-service level. Here in Portugal, at least, if we take a look at the number of teachers that are in schools, many of them are already over 40 years old. And I would say many also over 50 and 60. Many of them are going to retire soon. And when they did their teaching practice, they're teaching their student teacher training, let's say 30 years ago, it's very different from what teacher training is today. The reality of their classroom 30 years ago is very different from what it is today. So continuous professional training is key for everyone. And it's essential for raising awareness about these issues that we've been discussing, ELF, intercultural awareness, so on, as providing teachers the confidence to adjust their classroom practice and select and create additionally more appropriate materials, for instance. And here I think this plays an important role, giving them the confidence, right? That change is possible, but how can they go about this change, right? So some suggestions that have been put forth about how to make teachers more ELF aware. Before I go and give you examples of some things that I've done with some of my student teachers and taking a look at a project that I'm involved in, I want to just give you here from Sifakis, for instance, he mentions recognize the communication value of ELF-related accommodation skills. This is something that's important for teachers to become more ELF aware. So again, when we're talking about these skills, paraphrasing, making repairs, or rephrasing are similar to the communication strategies that I mentioned earlier. By doing so, both teachers and learners may feel empowered as successful intercultural communicators rather than deficient users who have not achieved or mastered native speaker proficiency. And these are issues to consider because, as we know, being successful doesn't mean having to necessarily follow everything grammatically as a native speaker. You don't need to have an accent like a native speaker, right? It's much more than that. Nikos also mentions the need to encourage action research projects that consider different learners' cultural identities, so to alleviate negative or stereotypical attitudes about immigrants. And this is crucial when we're talking about multilingual and multicultural classrooms, when we are thinking about a group as a whole. I've had the opportunity to visit some schools here in the Lisbon area, and I recall specifically there was this one school in which there were about 25 students. It was an eighth grade EFL class. And to tell you the truth, there were only about 5 or 6 Portuguese students. The rest were all foreigners. So we had, and when I walked into this classroom and I saw how it was organized, well, they could choose where they wanted to sit, the students. And so the Portuguese group was in one corner of the room. Then we had a group of the Asian speakers. Then we had a group of the students from African Portuguese speaking countries. Then we had students from African French speaking countries. So everything was so divided into groups, clusters. They didn't even speak with each other. They only spoke among their own peers from their own respective regions, let's say. And this is something that scared me, to see how this classroom was, and how in fact, we need to see the EFL classroom here in this case as a place where they could actually come together, because one of the issues was that English, to a certain extent or another, they had some proficiency of English. It may not have been great in some cases, but many of them did not know Portuguese. So English was here the common denominator between them. So if we develop projects research projects that allow learners to interact with each other, not only within the class, but also among different types of classes, among different schools abroad. Here in Europe, we have the eTwinning platform, which is excellent to allow students in schools to come together from different countries. And many interesting research projects have come out of the eTwinning platform. So action research projects is another issue, and also the use of modern technology for teachers to take advantage of websites and apps that allow learners to establish links with non-native speaker learners in other countries. And by doing so, we can promote change in the EFL classroom. And here, I think, is the key aspect: real-life intercultural communication. It's interesting that in my master's programs, when I'm teaching, I've had student teachers that some have some experience, others not much. But when there's always a section in which I talk about developing materials and the use of technology in developing materials, many don't feel comfortable using technology, which is surprising considering that today technology is a part of our everyday life. But when it comes to teaching, they don't feel comfortable using technology. So one of the things that I try is introducing them to different types of websites and apps that may be used for different modes, let's say interpersonal mode, for presentational mode, and so on, because we can use technology efficiently in order to be able to communicate and take the classroom beyond those four walls and being able to use the language with others. Enrique also mentions that it's important should be given to successful communication. So it's important that teachers give learners the opportunity to contact with different varieties of English to raise their awareness and understanding, and focus on a more limited range of linguistic elements that will maximize intelligibility at a productive international level. And this is crucial, I would say, giving them the opportunity to come into contact with different varieties of English, especially, and this can be done from early on at a primary level. Before our session began, I was speaking with some of our colleagues on Zoom, and I was saying, as a young girl, I recall that since I had never heard Brazilian Portuguese because I was living in the States, I had a neighbor who was Brazilian, and she wanted me to speak with her children in Portuguese, but I didn't understand what she was saying because I had never heard Brazilian Portuguese before. So this aspect is, if we have access to different varieties from early on and we become accustomed to hearing how the language is spoken differently, we'll be able to broaden our ability to understand and being aware of how English is used differently. If we want to maximize the intelligibility of our learners, why not use, for instance, multilingual resources to reach learners' goals more successfully? And we know that if we take, for instance, examples of successful athletes, actors or actresses, politicians, and so on, they're all multilingual, right? And they're able to use their multilingual repertoire in different on different occasions. I'm just thinking, for instance, if you recall the Modern Family sitcom, Sofia Vergara. If we take a look at her, she's Colombian, right? And throughout the show, she speaks English with a Colombian accent, and many of the times she code switches and uses language according to her needs. So, and she is one of the highest paying, I think, actress on television at the time, if I'm not mistaken. So we don't need to be a native speaker. We don't need to be fully proficient. We don't need to sound, in her case, let's say Sofia Vergara's case, as an American to be successful, right? And to be able to communicate. Again, taking a look at Leung and Lukowitz, they mentioned teachers require more training to confidently adapt and select appropriate materials for learners' needs. And here, in-depth textbook analysis is crucial, taking a critical approach to the textbooks that they're using. The textbooks that is used sometimes in schools, the teachers in some cases may choose a textbook that they want to work with. So this is good in this sense. So they have the ability to go through a variety of textbooks and choose the ones that they find more appropriate. But sometimes the schools impose a specific textbook. And here is, they don't have the flexibility. So taking a look at a textbook in terms of its structure, in terms of its content, looking at the language and culture that is portrayed, helps the teachers to engage in what they mention in a reflexive examination of their own classroom practice and educational values in relation to the students' language learning needs. And this here is a crucial issue. When we talk about textbook analysis, textbooks, for instance, that are nationally produced may take into consideration the general group. Let's say if we're talking about textbooks that are produced in Portugal, they take into consideration our context and, let's say, the curriculum. But sometimes international textbooks are applied in the classrooms from, let's say, Oxford, Longman, Macmillan, which sometimes may not be adapted to the specific context in which it's being used. So it is important that we take a look at these textbooks and analyze them in terms of both language and culture and how they may be adapted to our context and our students' needs. And therefore, the ability to make more informed decisions will lead to effective change in EFL classrooms. So if we're going to give them the opportunity to look at the textbook, they'll be able to and make informed decisions about it. In terms of culture, traditionally, EFL classrooms, the main focus is on the target culture, as we know, usually British American. Usually textbooks take also a large culture approach with a stereotypical point of view. National cultures are confronted at times, and learners' own cultures are mostly neglected in favor of other English-speaking cultures. And when we think about English-speaking cultures, as we know, they're usually associated with British, American. Then we have a little bit of Irish, Australian usually shows up. In terms of ESL countries, and we may have some reference to, let's say, India, but there's not much also going beyond that. The English-speaking cultures are, again, very restricted. If we want to promote a greater intercultural awareness, what are we thinking about? Probably taking on a small cultural approach, where we're fostering intercultural multilingual communication, in which interpersonal interactions are encouraged with people from different backgrounds, different countries. Learners should understand each communicative scenario as being different, therefore the need to consider speakers' own culture, experiences, and identity. Obviously, when we're communicating with someone, we need to consider all this aspect, their culture, their experience, their identity. When we come across wherever we're using English, we kind of, at least what I notice that I do many of the times, is I try to see what is the situation and how I can adapt accordingly so that the communication can be successful with that person, be it, let's say, at an outdoor fair, wherever I am, or at an academic conference. It can vary from situation to situation. We can also take a look at large culture alongside small culture, being aware of how different cultures act and react, how speakers can consider their responses accordingly, and which will influence then the successfulness of their interactions. So if we think of the adequate training for teachers, if they receive these issues and become interculturally aware, they become more aware of also their own attitudes and practices regarding language and culture. They may be able to create more authentic activities that promote reflection and actual intercultural communication in the classroom. So change can happen, right? With learners becoming more aware of their attitudes and identity. And here I'm going to take a look now at the specific case of Portugal. Some of you may know the situation here in Portugal, some of you may not. So the issue is that schools are in fact becoming more multilingual and multicultural. This is from the government report that they issue every year. It's from 2019, but the information that they have is from the previous school year, so the 2017-2018 school year. So in total, we had in 2017-2018 about 44,438 foreign students enrolled in basic and secondary education, which in comparison with the previous year means an almost increase of 15%. When we take a look at the top 8 nationalities that are enrolled, and this is from the order from the 1st to the 8th, the majority of the students, foreign students, are from Brazil. Yay! Then we have Cape Verde, Angola. Ukraine and Guinea-Bissau are on the same level. Romania, São Tomé and Príncipe, China, and Moldova. Curiously enough, if you notice, there we have some Portuguese-speaking countries here, but regardless of this, this doesn't mean that it's an easier integration. It may be easier to a certain extent because there are some shared issues here, but even the Portuguese that is spoken in Brazil, Cape Verde, from the example I just gave you previously, is that there are some differences, right, between Brazilian Portuguese and European Portuguese. So communication sometimes can also fall, right? Then if we take a look at it, we have Ukraine, Romania, so we're talking, and Moldova, so more of Eastern European countries, and China. If we take a look at the top 5 nationalities with the most increase, and here it's curious to see that Venezuela had a huge increase of over 100% from one year to another, because these are increases from one year to another, followed by India, Pakistan, the US, and Nepal. We all know the political situation in Venezuela, so it's not surprising, this increase. And because we have many Portuguese descendants in Venezuela, many of them decide to return to Portugal, even though they may never have lived in Portugal before. They decide to come to Portugal because their grandparents were Portuguese or their parents were Portuguese, so they decide to return to Portugal. We also have many of the Indians, Pakistanis, and Nepalese that we receive. Many work in the tourism and hospitality section, also in terms of agriculture and construction, for instance. To tell you the truth, I don't know why US is one of the top. We have many startups and lots of tech, companies, startup companies here. I don't know if that may be a reason why we have an increase in terms of US students, but this is the reality. In this case, I don't know how to tell you why this increase. So taking a look at the diversity of these students that we receive, and these are just some of them, the issue is that English is the most taught foreign language in the world. So it is the only common language that many of them bring to Portugal. Not counting the Portuguese speaking countries, the other students, when they come to Portugal, they do not normally know Portuguese. So English is usually the only language that they share with their classmates and their teachers. And even their parents most of the times don't even know Portuguese as well. So English, again, is the common denominator for communication at an educational level with both students and their parents. So if we take this into consideration, it's imperative that EFL students consider their learners' different cultural and linguistic backgrounds, so to ease the process of integration and acknowledging everyone's background as equal. So here, I would say that because English is the common denominator among all the different classes that they have in the school, probably the EFL class is where they may feel more comfortable, because it's the place where they share the same language, where they are able to communicate. So here, as I mentioned, the need for language educators to be prepared to face multilingual, multicultural environments, an issue that was not the case, let's say, quite a few years ago, 20, 30 years ago. We didn't receive many foreign students. And therefore, the importance of teacher education programs preparing well-informed educators. Here at the University of Lisbon, where I'm based, we have two types of MA programs in terms of language teaching. We have one that's targeted at primary EFL teachers. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about preparing teachers for 3rd and 4th grade, because that's when English is officially part of the curriculum. So they may have English in the 1st and 2nd grade, but that's as an extracurricular activity. So when we think about grades 3 to 4, we're considering students that are 7, 8 years old when they begin. Then we have another MA program focusing on more basic and secondary education, which is focusing on grades 7 to 12. So from, let's say, 12, 13 years old until they're 18 when they finish their secondary education. You may be thinking, so what happens in 5th and 6th grade? English language teachers, these teacher training is left for the polytechnical institutes. They do the training at this level for students. I know it may be a bit confusing for those of you that are not from Portugal, but this is just an idea for you to have of our situation. So these are the future teachers that I work with, right? Those focusing on young learners and those focusing on, let's say, teenagers. When we take a look at these programs, the two of them, the first one is only 3 semesters long. The second one is 4 semesters long. There's no specific seminar on intercultural communication, intercultural awareness, or ILF. However, these issues are touched upon in other seminars, such as plural didactic approaches or in English didactics. And I teach the English didactics seminar, so I always try to touch upon these issues with our students. Because we are based in Lisbon, they also do their student teaching practice in schools in the Lisbon metropolitan area. And the schools are, to a greater or lesser extent, multicultural and multilingual. And alongside Lisbon, it's also the Algarve, where there are the most foreign number of students enrolled in education. So we're in a prime area where we can actually help and our student teachers, and for them to also have the experience of these multilingual, multicultural classrooms. So by having these this type of environment, they have the opportunity to develop more ELF-related themes and materials when they actually do their student teaching practice. So what I wanted to take a look at are some examples and resources that they developed. I'll start by looking at some examples from a young learner perspective at a primary level. So from one of the things that I mentioned, right, why not from early on, right when they begin English in the 3rd grade, give them the opportunity to come into contact with real English language use. So hearing and listening to other types of Englishes that are not just British or American, and allow them to understand that English belongs to everyone. It may be used by everyone in different circumstances. So in this specific case, it's from a report from one of my students. She was working with a 3rd grade EFL class that had students from China and India, and she chose to use an app, I don't know if you're familiar with, called Voki. And what is Voki? Voki is a Web 2.0 tool that allows you to create your own avatar. And it can be a person, or it can be, a cartoon, an animal, whatever. And you can either record your own voice for the avatar. You can either upload an audio file, or you can use one of the available varieties that they have. And curiously enough, if we take a look through the list of varieties that are available, they have British English, American English, but also Australian, Scottish, Irish, South African, and Indian. So we're not only talking about inner circle countries, but also some outer circle countries. Unfortunately, there are no examples of accents or of non-native speakers. So we don't have, a Frenchman speaking in English or a Portuguese speaking in English. So it's limited to these varieties. What she chose to do was to use, therefore, in the different avatars that she created. She also created an Indian and Chinese avatars because there were Indian and Chinese students in her class, for them to understand and hear how English is spoken by everyone and how it may have different accents. And I just show you, I don't have the actual recording of it, but I have here a print screen. So we have here the, it was of a boy, an image of a boy playing a video game. And one of the avatars is saying, what is he doing? So we have here an Indian woman, and she spoke Indian English, this avatar. Then we had here a Chinese man, and he's responding while he's playing a game. Because there was no Chinese English, let's say, in the program, and because also the student didn't have someone Chinese speaking in English. If I don't recall, I think he spoke American English. That small detail I don't have in mind, but we do have here, as you can see, culturally speaking, an Indian woman and a Chinese, and the Indian woman spoke Indian English. So how did the class react? We're talking about 3rd graders. So when she first showed and played this, they teased and made fun of the appearance and the accent of the avatars, especially the Indian English variety. So they were laughing and joking. Remember that there were Indian and Chinese students in this classroom, all right? How would probably those Indian and Chinese students feel of them making fun of the avatars on the screen? Why did they maybe react this way, the Portuguese students? Well, they had never seen or heard characters like these using English, was one reason. And also the course book had no examples of linguistic and cultural diversity. The course book that they were working with was entirely of cartoon animals that were living in the forest. And there were no specific cultural references. There were no people actually in the course book. So, and if we think about this, for them, this was different. It was odd. Why were they speaking this way, right? And this here, I think, the outcome, by showing these types of diversity, the student teacher, what she tried to do, even if it's at a very simple, way, she tried to introduce the class to the diversity of English use around the world, and showing how those classmates come from different parts of the world, may also their English may sound different. And even though it may sound different, it doesn't mean that it's wrong, right? It's just different and it should be accepted like other types of Englishes. By doing so, she also tried that the foreign students didn't feel excluded or marginalized because of their cultural background. So she tried to include them here, and by bringing examples of people of their own heritage. And by doing so, she also tried to promote a greater awareness and inclusivity in the classroom. So she tried afterwards to explain to the students by showing this, that English is used across the world by different people. It may sound different, but it's good English regardless of it. Another student teacher, she had also a multilingual and multicultural third grade classroom in which there were students from Eastern European countries, from India, Angola, Cape Verde. And the student teacher herself was not Portuguese. She was from Moldova. And so she too had gone through the experience of moving to a new country, facing a new culture and a new language. So she knew how those foreign students probably felt being integrated into a new country and in a classroom. And the topic that she was working on for her didactic unit was my world and the world of others. And we can see here from, these were PowerPoints that she created. So asking a simple question as, where are you from? I'm from, and then identifying the country and then the nationality, right? So as you can see, we have here in the background, the flag of the country. We have the map where they come from. And she tried to introduce in her PowerPoint, she had examples not only of what would be the traditional target language culture, British and American, but she also took into consideration the local Portuguese culture, her own Moldovan heritage, and also the other students' cultures in the examples. The reaction of the students, these are third grade students again, they were so surprised to see their own cultures mentioned in class, because many of the times this isn't referred to. We usually have, if we use materials from course books from publishers, there are a set, and nowadays publishers usually send everything already preconceived, all done, and you just download it, photocopy it. And it's not considering the specific group that you're working with. And she took the time to consider who were the students in her class, where they came from, and how could she integrate their own culture as well into the class. The outcome, because she used this right from the start in her first student teaching lesson that she conducted, she created a closer bond with the group. Although she had already been observing the group in previous lessons, this was the lesson that she was actually teaching. So the students already had some contact with her, but they even became closer afterwards, and she gained their trust. And this was key for the lessons that would come afterwards. The same student with the same third grade class afterwards, this was during Easter. So she talked about Eastern traditions around the world because this was during Easter time. And this was, again, a PowerPoint that she had built. And she took once more the issue of Easter, what would be in the US, let's say, so the target culture, one of them, right, that we see. She took into consideration the local culture, Portugal, but she also took into consideration here in this example that I put, there were more of Eastern European countries, how they celebrate Easter. So by doing so, she explored not only how Easter celebrations differ, but she also talked about how in some countries, Easter is not even celebrated. She further went on to the importance, therefore, of respecting others' traditions and values. They may be different, they may celebrate things different, but it's different ways of looking at the same thing. What did this create in the students? A very enthusiastic discussion. They were very interested in seeing what was happening in other countries. Those students that came from, let's say here in the example of Russia, Ukraine, Romania, they were very interested and enthusiastic to talk about their own experience and share it with their classmates. And the outcome was obviously awareness of how different cultures can celebrate Easter, but it even went more than that. The students became interested in visiting the countries to get to know the cultures more. So they would refer to back to these presentations, and they were mentioning that they wanted to travel and to see what it was like there. And the student teacher here took the opportunity to explain for them to understand that English is many of the times used as a language of travel. So if they were to visit these countries, they would probably use English to communicate with each other, right? So it was not only talking about the cultural aspects, but how English can be used if we're going to communicate with people in those countries, if we're going to go abroad. Taking a look at here at an upper basic educational level, this was a student from 7th grade, so more of a basic intermediate level. The topic that she was working was home sweet home, reason and problem solving, interpersonal relations, self-development, and autonomy. What did she do? She created videos specifically for her students, and she asked her Erasmus friends, both native and non-native speakers, to introduce themselves and talk about their lives in countries where they lived. Her first idea was to have Skype meetings with them, but unfortunately her school didn't have a good internet connection, so she wasn't able to do this. So she thought of how she could improvise, and she asked, and here is just a still from one of her colleagues, who of a country, it was from people in Ireland, in Germany, in Spain. So she had people from different European countries, specifically talking to her students in her class. So they would say something as simple, hi class, 7B, how are you? I'm so-and-so and I live in so-and-so place. And so this was the first time that these students have ever heard speakers of English talking to them directly, even if it was in a video. Their reaction, they were super interested, very inquisitive. They wanted to find out more about these young people because they were in their 20s, let's say. And in the following lessons, they would often refer back to those videos. They wanted to compare them with what they were talking about in class at the time. So it was a very good way to get them enthusiastic and generate discussion with them. The outcome. We allow them to foster their awareness of diversity in Europe. Many of these students in this class hadn't traveled abroad yet. So for them, the opportunity of hearing students was unique. And they also had the opportunity to hear a variety of different accents, because we're talking about different native and non-native speakers. So it was excellent for them. She also did with this class, another activity was a Key Pals project. And Nikos had, in the example that I referred to previously about action research and real communication, she got in contact with 2 EFL teachers in Spain from Asturias and Galicia, and who had the same age and grade. And she got them to exchange emails with each other so that they could get to know each other and compare their different cultural realities. So it was kind of like a pen pal, which we would do in the past in letters and writing. Now it was via email. And again, some issues arose regarding communication because it's written form, but they were able to overcome this by paraphrasing, by rewriting, code switching, sending pictures, etc. So even when sometimes the message didn't get clearly through, this didn't mean that the communication broke down. They would try different means of trying to explain what they were saying to each other. And this is great to see that what initially became mandatory, right, a compulsory assignment, later on continued. So the students weren't just exchanging those emails that were necessary to be assessed because the teachers were in a CC in the email, but afterwards they mentioned that they continued on sending individual emails to their Spanish colleagues, talking about their likes, their dislikes, video games that they played, what their school lives were like, etc. So they had the opportunity to go beyond what was the 4 walls of the classroom and actually use the English language in real world communication. And emails is one of the ways that we communicate nowadays, right? So it was an excellent opportunity for them. The outcome, it developed the learners' intercultural communicative competence and intercultural awareness. They became more interculturally aware of the differences and similarities between several countries and cultures. Even though Spain is right next to us, there are many differences. And they learned also to accept the differences and sometimes divergent personal and cultural features. So they were able to negotiate these issues and being able to continue on afterwards, even, which was great to see this. So just to finish up, some final remarks. When we're talking about developing successful intercultural communicators, from a beginner level, this is, of course, feasible, although it may be a bit more challenging to develop certain types of self-aware activities. But it is important to broaden young learners' understanding of how English is used differently across cultures, and it can be used as a common language to discuss issues that promote tolerance, respect, and acceptance, which is the key issues that our student teachers in the PowerPoints that they built and the avatars that they did, they wanted to promote these ideas of integration, right, with the students. At a more intermediate and advanced level, we can actively engage students in real language use, which allows them to develop the necessary skills and strategies to be able to communicate in different scenarios. And we saw that in the emails that they sent. They were able to use different types of communication strategies to talk with each other or write with each other. I must say, their communication afterwards was not just via email, but afterwards they would also use WhatsApp or on Facebook and so on. So they would communicate via social media. So what we can see here is learning and using the language go hand in hand. And Zeidelhofer in 2011, Barbara Zeidelhofer, focuses on learning how to language. So the ability to use diverse strategies to make sense, negotiate meaning, and co-construct meaning. So these are all key aspects that we've seen, especially at more intermediate and advanced levels of what can be done. So the issue is exploring these aspects of ELF, ICC, and intercultural awareness in teacher education so that teachers and future teachers can gain greater awareness of the issues involved and reflect upon the challenges that they may face in their teaching practices and how they may contribute to change in the EFL classroom. So if the aim is to educate, as I put here, successful intercultural language users, it's urgent that these concepts be introduced and developed in EFL classrooms. Some examples here I put are of some publications that exist in terms of examples of ELF-related lessons and materials in which learners' intercultural awareness and intercultural communication are encouraged. We have a publication that I did with my colleague Luis Guerra. We have here examples of Yasmin Beirut, Lucila Lopriore, Aya Matsuda, Savio here, Paula Vettorel as well. And there are many others, obviously. But I just wanted to finish up with the reference, and I think that my colleague Lucila talked about this when she spoke here, is the importance of the Enrich project that I'm a part of, which is English as a Lingua Franca Practices for Inclusive Multilingual Classrooms, which is an Erasmus Plus project that has helped in-service teachers developing these notions that I talked about here. And this here, I think, is innovative in the sense that it was an online course that included teachers from many different countries. And I think there was also a participant from Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. But it's very unique. We have Nikos Sifakis from the Atlantic Open University. From Hometre, we have Lucila Lopriore in the project. Me from Lisbon. Oslo Met, we have Dina Tsagari. And from Boğaziçi University, we have Yasmin Beirut, who is involved, and we have the CTI who helped us with the technological aspect of this project. And you have here the website, which you can check it out if you want. Please feel free to do so. And what makes it so unique is the fact that we created a course, a CPD course, a continuous professional development course that was based on the needs analysis that took place with EFL teachers and learners, adolescent learners and young learners, because we wanted to know what issues did they feel needed to be worked on in a multilingual classroom. We created then the course on Moodle, and it was supposed to be a blended course. We in Portugal, this course took place between February and June. We were able to meet with our participants once in person. Afterwards, our sessions were via Zoom, unfortunately. But I think that it went very well because it gave them the opportunity to reflect upon their teaching practices. They were able to come into contact with colleagues from other universities, other schools in other countries. We'll be able to, we're in the process of writing a handbook that may be helpful for teachers afterwards of developing these issues. So essentially the competences that we wanted to work on was integrating ELF in multilingual classrooms and being able to prepare learners to become successful communicators in our real life world. Here are some of the outcomes again in terms of the teachers becoming specialists, innovators, autonomous thinkers, and becoming agents of change. We have here a great group of Portuguese participants that are very enthusiastic with this course, so which was great, and we hope to keep on working with them. But also the CPD course aims to promote learners' key communicative and other transversal skills and provide a sense of belonging to a community of users of a shared language, right? So that they are able to communicate not only with at a local level, but at a wider European level, but also a global level. Here are just some of the topics that we touched upon in the course. So we went on not only discussing key notions such as ELF and communication strategies and multilingualism, but we focused on the issue of teaching English. So what is ELF awareness? How can culture be developed? What type of methodology may be considered? How are we going? Can we look at language assessment, planning lessons, and also in terms of learning the language from the student perspective? So these here are some of the issues that I wanted to talk to you about today. Thank you for your time. I think I went a little bit overboard. I got excited with the topic, but I think that's about it. And I'll stop sharing my screen now. And sorry, Savio, I got excited.
Thank you, Lili. Thank you, Lili. Yes, you went over the time, but it was great.
Sorry.
It was really, really nice. No, it's okay. It's okay. We are very flexible here because actually you gave a wonderful overview, not only of what you wrote in the text, but also the reality in Portugal, which I think was very, very enlightening to a lot of people here in Brazil who don't know much about the reality in other countries. So then thanks again for this wonderful presentation. There are lots of things that we could explore here. And maybe we won't have the time, but I really, I wanted to, I'm going to make a few comments and then pass on to make one question, I promise. And then pass on to to Daniel so he can see the people who the comments and possible questions we have. But anyway, it was really enlightening in a way you could summarize the the great text you wrote. And also while you were presenting, I was showing the book where you also have a chapter with Luis, and we mentioned this book that was organized by Nikos and Natasha, English as a Lingua Franca for EFL Contexts.
Exactly.
Yeah, you have it there.
Right next to me.
Right?
The two of us.
Yes. So, but anyway, it called several things that you mentioned there in the data called my attention. And it reminded me of, this whole idea of people ignoring other cultures, especially in the language class, in the English class. And it reminded me of something that Mia Couto from Mozambique, my favorite writer, once wrote. And then he said, em português, nunca nos comunicamos tanto e nunca foi tão notório nosso isolamento. It's funny because when you mention technology, so people can interact with people from all over the world. And then when you bring something like, the example you brought, the teacher prepared with the Indian speaker, and the result was that the students were surprised because they never heard, not only, they were never exposed to that English or to those Englishes, but also to the culture, to cultural aspects. It means that this whole idea that we are globalized is not really the way people, really picture. But again, I'm going to ask a question based on what you said on teacher training, because actually you gave us a great picture of what we call here basic education, primary and secondary education. We have a whole issue at the university level preparing teachers to teach, And for example, when you mentioned that they are exposed, teachers are exposed to these issues at an MA level, so at the graduate level, I wonder what happens to them in terms of the undergraduate level. So in teacher, let's say in pre-service or the undergraduate level, are they exposed to these issues? So, or only at the graduate level? And then the other thing is related to in-service teachers. I would like to ask you, out of your experience, and Luis taught, I think he touched this a little bit, in terms of resistance. So how could we, what, for example, what did you observe in terms of resistance, especially those teachers that you mentioned that they've been on the road for many years, some of them are about to retire. Did you notice in the investigations you conducted any resistance, or are they willing to to incorporate these new let's say concepts, ideas? And also to finish, when you say, for example,
I need to write it down.
Just comments.
I'm going to write it down.
Now, and then within the same topic, for example, when you said teachers need more training, and I agree they need more training, but of course, I really would like you to say something about, for example, because the whole idea when we work with training, I have the feeling that we might be operating at a receptor level. So they get all that information, but we don't know if they will really implement, so then if they will become really productive. So my question is how to move from the receptor level to the productive level. It means from moving from teacher training to what happens next. So this is what I wanted to say. But anyway, thanks a lot for this wonderful presentation, Lili.
All right, so I think the first issue that you talked about is to what extent are at a BA level, an undergraduate level, are students introduced to the concept of ELF, right? I think this depends at a university, from university to university. I would, from what I know here in Portugal, there is no specific ELF class that you can take. So this doesn't exist. Many of the times these issues may be developed in a linguistics class as a module, for instance, or if you may have in terms of the English classroom talking about these issues. I, for instance, besides teaching in the master's program, I've also taught English at an undergraduate level. So I discuss these issues and implement an ELF-aware approach with my students, even though they may not be fully aware of what I'm doing. But it is an issue that can be done indirectly, right? But saying that, oh, I can take an ELF class, there are no ELF classes. I know that I first was introduced to ELF at an undergraduate level, for instance, in English linguistics with, Professor Luisa Azuaga, in which we had a whole year with her. But we went from Old English to English as a lingua franca. So the English as a lingua franca was the last module that we had that was discussed upon. And that's where she got me excited in my last year of the undergraduate program. Taking a look at older teachers, are they interested in ELF?
If there is any resistance from them.
I ended with the project, the Enrich project, and in this project, I don't know if Luis Guerra spoke about this project when he presented. Okay, and also our colleague Ricardo Pereira from the Polytechnic Institute of Leiria. And before we actually began the CPD course, we did what was a pre-registration of people to see if people were interested, if teachers were interested in doing this course. And curiously enough, we asked the Portuguese Association for English Teachers to help disseminate. We had over 200 people interested, 200 EFL teachers interested in taking this course. And in this pre-registration, one of the aspects was also considered their years of experience teaching, if they had multilingual classrooms and so on, because we wanted a specific group of teachers to do the course. And from what we've seen, because we have that data, right? Most of the teachers actually were teachers with over 10 years of experience and in the age group of over 40 years old. So yes, from what we saw, people were interested in taking this course. I don't know if it was also because we were going to offer them ECTS credits and it was a free course. But when we presented it, they knew that it was going to be a 300-hour course. So it was going to be something long, in depth, that would get them, you know, actually thinking in the concepts. And regardless, we had over 200 pre-registrations, which was fabulous. When we actually, in practice, we could only accept, we never thought we would get this number of interested teachers. We could only accept 30 because that was what was stipulated because of, well, bureaucratic issues. And the feedback that we got of those people that did the course was very good. And when the course was implemented at in-service teachers, and you were talking about going from a more receptive to productive level, what's curious about this course and what makes it innovative is not only the fact that they were, they saw the videos that we created and they participated in forums and did different types of activities, but they at the end had a final assignment, and that I didn't mention. And they actually had to design a lesson plan and implement it. And unfortunately, the ideal scenario would be for them to implement it in the classroom, in person, face-to-face sessions. But because they implemented this in May, June, and well, COVID, we all know, some of them didn't have the opportunity to actually implement it, but many of them did, but via Zoom or the Google Classrooms, right? So they did it virtually. So they were actually able to design the lesson, implement it with their students, their class, and then reflect upon how it went, what went well, what could have been improved, and so on. And they got some feedback from us as well. What we've seen and the feedback that we got from our specific Portuguese participants was some of them saying, for instance, oh, I was so, this was fantastic, it was a great opportunity, thank you. Do you want feedback? Because now in September, they went back to school, so they're teaching face-to-face, and they're saying that they're going to be implementing this and that they'll give us feedback of how it went in the face-to-face sessions, which is fantastic to see that.
Great, yeah. I'd love to see that later.
We're hoping to get information, and we'll, once we get everything, we'll, after analyzing it and so on, we'll hopefully be able to disseminate it at some conferences and publications and so on, but that will take some time, but we'll definitely share with you.
Great. Okay, thank you, Lili. So Danielle, so now you take lead. Let's see if we have somebody in the room. I think Poliana was going to ask a question, right?
Exactly. Well, Poliana has a question. Polly, please.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Hi, Polly.
See me?
Yes.
Hi.
So good morning to you all, and good afternoon for you, Lili. It's a really huge pleasure to have you here in our group.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank you and welcome you once again. I was a participant in a Enrich course. I was listening to you.
So she was the Brazilian one, Lili.
Yes, good. And it was an amazing experience for me as a teacher and as a researcher as well. And a really, really valuable experience. I didn't have the chance to implement my assignment, as you said, due to the pandemic scenario, but even though it was really incredible for me. So
excellent. It's great to receive feedback.
Okay. May I pose my question in Portuguese?
Yes.
Ok. Então, primeiro, eu gostaria de registrar que muitos dos seus textos, Lili, incluindo a sua tese, tem me ajudado muito a pensar sobre os caminhos da minha própria tese, né, que está em andamento. E eu estou aqui para te agradecer por iluminar tanto as minhas ideias e para te pedir que me ajude a pensar sobre mais um aspecto. Eu tenho observado em diversos textos que a competência comunicativa intercultural tem se destacado como um princípio importante da perspectiva de ensino do ILF. Mas, como você mesmo pontua em seu texto, a competência comunicativa intercultural tem sido alvo de críticas, né, por apresentar uma forte orientação para os níveis nacionais de cultura e, consequentemente, por não levar o ILF em consideração. Nesse caso, então, não seria o desenvolvimento da consciência intercultural que deveria aparecer como um dos princípios do ILF, em vez da competência comunicativa intercultural? Tem havido um equívoco no uso desses termos? Né? O que você teria a dizer sobre esse ponto?
Responder em português é melhor? Ou...
Yes, Lili, go ahead. So we are exposed to another Portuguese. This is wonderful.
Yes.
Pluf, não é? Português língua franca. Pluf.
Yeah, now it's pluf. Pluf.
Uma das coisas que eu, até na minha tese, que eu falo um pouco, eu acho que os dois, os termos normalmente estão em inglês, competência comunicativa e intercultural, surgiu primeiro, não é? Daí nós pensarmos um pouco sobre o Byron e dos seus savoirs, não é? E é um bom ponto de partida para nós olharmos para a competência comunicativa ou a comunicação intercultural, quando nós estamos a falar neste aspecto. Mas quando nós olhamos para Baker, ele vai um bocadinho para além, não é? Por exemplo, ele refere que nós não precisamos nos focar apenas em questões culturais específicas de cada país. Eu acho que o small cultural approach, não é? Muitas vezes que se fala, é importante também ser tido em consideração. Eu, para além de dar aulas na faculdade, também tenho vários anos e comecei a dar aulas de Business English. E eu acho que neste aspecto, este intercultural awareness é essencial para poder comunicar com pessoas de diversos backgrounds, não é? E, por exemplo, quando nós pensamos o que é uma successful communication, não é? Um dos exemplos eu recordo e dou como exemplo aos meus alunos de Business English é o facto de, em termos culturais, quando vamos falar, não precisamos, temos de ter em conta que o que pode ser aceito para uma cultura pode não ser aceito para outra, como métodos de cumprimento, não é? Quando nos cumprimentamos, pode ser 2 beijinhos ou um aperto de mão, não é? Por exemplo, oferecer uma prenda quando nós estamos a fazer um business deal, pode ser visto como algo simbólico de apreciação, mas também pode ser visto como algo de bribe someone, não é? De querer dar algo. Todos estes aspectos, quando falamos de cultura, não têm a ver necessariamente com cultura nacional, mas com a cultura do próprio país, do que é considerado aceitável, não aceitável, o poder adaptar de acordo com a situação em que nós estamos. Isto é um bocadinho mais complicado de explicar em português, porque eu estou habituada sempre às leituras em inglês e a escrever em inglês.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead and shift to English because I forgot Paola is on YouTube. So then, she made a question in English. So go ahead and shift to English, please.
But I think that's basically it, right? When we're talking about intercultural awareness, it's going beyond than the nationalistic approach and being able to understand each other, respect the issues of tolerance, of respect, of acceptance that we were talking about. The 7th grade students that were emailing each other, they were able to overcome the difficulties that they had, right? They didn't need to focus, they weren't just focusing on Spanish and Portuguese cultural issues, they went beyond that. They were talking about what could be their daily lives, their hobbies, what they did, what they didn't do, all right? So I think they, in a way, complement each other, right? It's starting off in one aspect and shifting over to the other.
Okay, I couldn't agree more, Lili. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pollyanna, and good luck with your thesis. I know that it's a very demanding project.
Yeah, it is, it is.
Now we have a question from Arnaud. Arnaud is from our group, but he's watching from YouTube, and he sent us a question. I'm going to read it. How should we develop an intercultural study via ILF with students from the same country, same state, same city, etc., once their curriculum or organization is structured based on native speakers?
Oh, that's a bit long, what you just said.
It's what we call a monolingual, monocultural class.
Mm-hmm. Here, from what I understand, this person just wants to focus on those groups of students. Is that it?
Yeah.
So not communicating with others.
No, I guess no.
Well,
I think what he mentioned, I mean, what he means basically is this context, right, Danielle? So the context is that it's in a way it's a non-multilingual context.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we can think about, for instance, is if we consider having or using materials that can be diverse. Why not take advantage of, and there's an article that I wrote with Luis in which we talk about different materials that can be used, either, let's say, YouTube videos that can be used with different types of interlocutors with different varieties of English. There are also, for instance, why not use a corpus? The voice corpus, for instance, is great, in which we can use different types of listenings and recordings that exist of real, actual use of English among different speakers from different countries, in which we have different domains in which the English is used in more formal and informal settings. Why not use, for instance, films and TV series, for instance, in which we have examples of interlocutors with different varieties of English, with different backgrounds. I gave you the example of Modern Family, for instance. Why not use an episode of Modern Family? Or we have films in which we also have the multicultural, multilingual aspect of communication and miscommunication. I'm thinking of one movie that I used with my students was Crash. I think it's from 2007. We won the Oscar for Best Film. It takes place in LA, and we have a different variety of different speakers in LA, and how sometimes miscommunication can lead to I don't want to ruin the film, but can lead to several bad decisions, let's say, in the end. And it also works with these breaking down barriers in terms of language and cultural taboos that exist. That's just one aspect. Also, in terms of literature, why not take advantage of different types of authors? I know that Savio has mentioned this in several of his talks and publications of different authors that use code switching and translanguaging in literature, very well-known authors. Savio, I don't know if you want to mention here some examples that you've referred to, because it's you that I'm referring to.
Yeah, no, yes. In terms of literature, we can explore an entire world. So Indian literature. So, exactly. And I think I mentioned Gloria Anzaldúa, that she trans languages all the time. Yes, this is a great, I think literature, I mean, English or literature is in English. So I think that will be a wonderful resource to make our classrooms more multicultural and more multilingual, for sure. Yeah.
Right, not English literature, but literature in English, right, as you were saying.
Yeah, yes.
So these are, I think there are plenty of resources and materials that we can use to, in our monolingual, let's say, classroom, of having them the opportunity of becoming aware of how English is used differently, and how and giving examples of how communication can be successfully achieved, right, with people from different backgrounds. So you don't necessarily need to have a multilingual or multicultural classroom to work these issues.
Yeah.
I think Gabriela has a question now.
Ok. Bom dia e boa tarde. Lili, eu gostei bastante do exemplo que você deu daquela aula das representações, né, dos personagens indianos e chineses e tudo mais, porque é uma forma dos alunos se sentirem representados no material que eles estão, né, tendo acesso, que eles estão usando. Só que eu queria saber sobre a sua visão do conceito de variety. Porque, assim, pensando nos estudos de ILF, esse conceito, assim, trazendo também essa concepção de língua, qual a concepção de língua que a gente está usando, né, que a gente está se baseando para falar de ILF. pensando numa visão mais aberta, mais dinâmica de língua, você acha que esse conceito de variety ainda é válido? Ainda faz sentido trazer para a sala de aula essas different varieties, né, of English? Porque dentro de um conceito mais aberto de língua, essas divisões, né, das variantes de inglês, você acha que ainda faz sentido? Queria saber sua opinião sobre isso. Obrigada.
Nada, eu é que agradeço, e isso foi um aspecto muito importante. Eu diria até que, sim, podemos introduzir, por que não, variedades linguísticas que existem, que estão codificadas, não é? Como o Indian English, que eu referi, não é? Mas uma das coisas que, sim, e eu usei o exemplo do sétimo ano, dos meninos dos vídeos, eles tiveram acesso não a uma variedade do inglês que está codificada, mas sim a outros ingleses que são de non-native speakers, não é? Ou seja, eles tiveram a oportunidade de ouvir um alemão a falar inglês com as suas especificidades, havia curiosamente, até um colega brasileiro que estava a viver, acho que na Holanda, que era colega dela, ou seja, também ouvir um português do Brasil a falar em inglês. Ou seja, não só realmente devem ter contacto com variedades, que são do inner and outer circle, não é? Mas sim às outras, não são variedades porque não estão codificadas, mas a outros ingleses com as suas particularidades, os seus accents, até muitas das vezes nós trazemos a nossa língua materna para o inglês, não é? O tal code switching in translanguaging, não é? Que faz parte. Sim, eu diria que as duas aspectos complementam-se, não só focar em let's say ESL varieties and other inner circle varieties, mas sim
World Englishes, né?
Exatamente, os World Englishes, exatamente é isso. A outros accents, outros tons, porque lá está, muitas das vezes eles vão estar em contacto com outros falantes não nativos, não é? A maioria da comunicação, como nós sabemos, tem lugar entre falantes não nativos. E daí a importância de treinar os ouvidos, não é? E perceberem que há diferentes maneiras de pronunciar palavras, que não há uma maneira correta só. Eu, curiosamente, tive uma aluna do inglês, do mestrado, que era com os Young Learners, e ela falava com mais um American accent, não é? E ela fez um listening com os meninos, e o listening era de British English, e houve um menino que percebeu que uma das palavras que eles disseram no listening era diferente daquilo que a professora dizia, que a professora pronunciava de outra maneira. E ele perguntou, não é? Então, mas qual é que é a maneira correta? Aí no vídeo diz assim, mas a professora diz desta maneira. E ela veio para mim, para a aula, e ela ficou, ele fez-me esta pergunta, agora como é que eu lido? Eu assim, então, pronto, a aluna em questão, não há uma maneira correta de pronunciar. Como está a pronunciar está correto, e como está no vídeo está correto. É preciso nós explicarmos a eles, aos meninos, que há várias maneiras de pronunciar, não é? Vários accents. E que, desde que essa comunicação não seja... não haja um breakdown in communication, não é? Não há dizer que nós temos de dizer garage ou garage, não é? Por exemplo, ou dictionary and dictionary. Ou se for um francês, dictionary. Há várias maneiras de pronunciar as coisas, não é? Não há um certo ou um errado. E aliás, e isto aqui, eu tinha aqui um vídeo, mas não temos tempo, mas eu deixo já a indicação. No YouTube há um vídeo chamado iRabbit, que eu tinha referido, se eu tivesse tempo eu mostrava, mas como não, já são quase 4, eu não vou mostrar. Metam no YouTube iRabbit. Eu vou passar para o inglês. If you put on YouTube iRabbit, it's an excellent video in which you can see how miscommunication takes place. It's an iRabbit is a virtual pet, and Thierry is a French technophile that buys his iRabbit. He wants to start the iRabbit, and it says, say hello to start. And he said, hello? He doesn't say hello, right? Hello, then he said, hello. He tries to say hello.
Very French, very French.
Exactly. The iRabbit does not understand it, and it doesn't start. So he calls the call center. It's an Indian that works at the call center.
Operator.
But the Indian operator is very British speaking. And we can see the communication that takes place between them is hilarious because they're unable to communicate with each other. The Indian operator is very British and he doesn't understand what the Frenchman is saying. And the Frenchman is very irritated and frustrating. And he says, for instance, I ate the rabbit. And he said, you cannot eat the rabbit, sir. But he was trying to say, I hate the rabbit. Or something as he said,
Yeah.
focus. He said, we don't use that language, sir. But he said, wanted to say, I need to focus, right? So it's definitely worth it. YouTube, iRabbit, it's hilarious. And it's a great example of how miscommunication can take place and
it's just
the
like,
need to negotiate meeting.
It's just like, remember the Pink Panther movie where the teacher tries to teach him hamburger, that he says damn burger, remember that?
There are tons of examples that can be used, right?
Yeah,
Of what is necessary to achieve successful communication. It's not knowing proper English only, right?
Okay, great. Thanks, Gabriela, for this great question.
Paola Hobbs says she enjoys listening to Portuguese. So that's not a problem. And she says that your lecture was very inspiring.
Thank you.
And she subscribes to all you said. And she says that it's very important to make English personally relevant in our classes, connecting to how our students use it in the world out there.
Definitely. I would say I entirely agree. We need to get our students to feel as if English also belongs to them. And this is many of the times of the case when we're thinking about EFL, foreign, right? We're learning a foreign language. It belongs to someone else. It's not ours, right? And therefore, we don't feel that we're at liberty to use it like we want to. But the issue is if we're looking at studies in terms of English language use, who is changing the language? It's the non-native speakers. And what at one point may be incorrect English may become part of what is, let's say, the norm, right? So, and if we want our students to actually be able to use the language, they need to be able to feel confident in using it, right? And it's a part of their daily life. So definitely, I agree with what she mentioned.
And I think we have time for our last question, Savi, right?
Yes, one more question and then we finish.
The last question is from Andrea Machado Castiglione de Araújo. And she asks, could you talk more about material development and teacher authorship? And I was going to ask you that, Lili, about material development. In your opinion, do you think it's possible to develop intercultural material to be used globally, a single material to be used globally, as it's done, right? That's most of the material we use are, made to be used in different countries.
Well, if we want to build specific material for our learners, right, it's important to consider their specific needs, right? A one-size-fits-all is difficult, obviously, right? But if there's, let's say, a text that we may want to use that exists that may be interesting, maybe we can take that text. We don't necessarily have to use the questions or the activities that have been developed by a specific author, but then adapt the activities that will develop around that text, right? So let's say this may not interest me. When we're talking about the use even of the textbooks, right, of looking at them critically and reflecting upon them, sometimes there may be some texts that are actually valid, that they're good, but the activities that are developed are not that great, right? So we can use the text, but then take advantage of what already exists, because we know teachers have tons of class hours per week. They're thinking, now I have to create my own material? Are you crazy? How am I going to do that? Well, we can take advantage of what already exists and try to adapt it according to our needs, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to start from scratch. And I would even recommend, if you're creating a specific material, don't spend too much time on creating something that will be used only once for 5 minutes in your lesson and will never be used again, right? The important aspect is using, if you're going to build something from scratch, something that can be used afterwards, and that may be useful. But again, it is important, I would say, for teachers to have this opportunity, but don't use, as I've seen sometimes teachers, I also tutor because I like tutoring for one issue. Because, well, besides getting some extra money, which is always good, you also get, as a tutor, you get to hear things about what happens in the EFL classroom that they never admit to their teachers. And me, since I'm a teacher educator, I like to know what's going on in the classrooms, how they feel, so that I can give information and, you know, get my student teachers to reflect upon these issues. So I get inside information in that sense. I've seen, for instance, teachers that apply worksheets that have been used for 10, 15 years. I've seen, for instance, worksheets a few years, 2 or 3 years ago, that was about the actor Joshua Hartnett in the film Pearl Harbor. And it's set in the first of all, Pearl Harbor, I think, came out in 2000, 2002. These students haven't seen Pearl Harbor. And it says that Joshua Hartnett is in his 20s. He's in his 40s now. Come on, right? I mean, okay, we know that you may not have time to build, you know, on materials constantly, but let's not use materials that are clearly outdated. And in terms of the reality of teenagers, they've never seen Pearl Harbor and they don't know who Joshua Hartnett, and he's definitely not in his 20s now, right?
Great.
Yeah. We find the same thing here, so it's not only in your reality. Yeah. Okay, I think we're done. We're done, Daniel, with questions and comments.
Yeah, people are only complimenting Lili.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
thank
we
you
have
for
three
sticking
minutes.
for 2 hours.
Yeah, but I would say I have to thank Aurora also for being there and letting us complete the 2 hours. So then, Lili, again, olha, muito obrigado, foi muito bom. Eu acho que o que Poliana trouxe resume que a gente tem feito um trabalho que tem se expandido, a gente tem trocado muitas ideias, os textos que vocês escrevem, que a gente vai, digamos, criando um intercâmbio muito bacana. Então, mesmo aqueles que não conhecem a realidade de Portugal, conhecem um pouco a partir dos textos, a partir dessas palestras, e a gente vai ficando cada vez mais próximo, porque muitas das realidades são bastante parecidas. Então,
exatamente,
assim,
muitas das vezes há este overlapping, não é?
Isso. Então, olha, muito obrigado por essa disponibilidade e por essa palestra tão bacana. E eu acho que sempre o que é bom é que fica aquele gostinho de eu quero mais, né? Então, antes de terminar e passar a palavra para você se despedir, eu quero avisar todos e todas que daqui a 15 dias o nosso próximo convidado é o professor Limário, lá da USP, que vai falar um pouco, a gente vai discutir bastante temas como também ELF, mas colonialidade, decolonialidade, entre outras questões. Então, de novo, já estão todos e todas convidados e convidadas. Então, Lili, querida, eu deixo aí 30 seconds for you to say goodbye to us. And again, thanks a lot. Foi muito bom mesmo, viu? Muito obrigado. Um grande beijo aí para você, para a Aurora, e um abraço em todos. E eu deixo a palavra com você.
Obrigada, Savio. Thank you, Savio, for the invitation. Thank you for being welcoming me in such a friendly group of colleagues. It's always good to exchange ideas and debate them with them, especially now that we're not crossing the Atlantic Ocean or even going from one place to another. We don't see each other in conferences. We don't have the opportunity to have these discussions over a nice view of the Rio Tejo, over a nice pastel de nata, right, Savio?
Yes.
Hopefully soon we'll be able to be with each other and continue on discussing these issues face to face. But thank you for the time. Thank you for sticking around for 2 hours. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Por isso, muito obrigada a todos. Foi prazer mesmo estar aqui convosco.
É uma forma de a gente matar as saudades, não é?
É uma
quem
outra
sabe,
maneira. Hoje em dia,
quando pudermos viajar, o convite já foi feito a você para vir conhecer Salvador. e a gente poder também aqui comer um belo de um acarajé olhando para o pôr do sol no Rio Vermelho e em outros lugares, tá bom?
Essas fotos
Então,
maravilhosas
gente,
das belas praias.
as belas praias, né? Então, a saudade é grande, mas a gente vai matando aos poucos. Muito obrigado, Daniel. Thanks, Daniel, for all the help. Poliana, Gabriela, and everybody there on YouTube. Thanks for being with us, and I'll see you in 2 weeks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Desligou, Daniel?